Hello, my fellow humans, and welcome to the Multiverse Leadership Podcast. When you think about making a real impact in your organization or community, what's one thing you wish you had more of? Strategy, support, or hands-on guidance? Well, today I'm excited to welcome Katrina Purcell, founder of the Katrina Purcell LLC and winner of the 2024 Great Companies International Women Entrepreneur Award. Katrina is a powerhouse in strategy, operational excellence, and agile transformation, working closely with startups and nonprofits to unlock their full potential. Katrina, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you so much, Justin. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It was a little hard to get through that one for some reason today.
There's a lot of buzzwords.
Gotta get my game face on.
There you go.
Well, we'd love to tell the audience a little bit more about your journey that you've been on and how you're helping other humans out there.
Sure. So I like to call it growth operations consulting, but not in the typical consulting sense. I'm very much hands-on with teams and with the people that I both coach and work with. My goal is really to help underrepresented founders really have outsized impact with their startups. And so it's really about democratizing access to the information and the networks that you need in order to be successful.
I know it's really hard out there trying to find information sometimes when you're a startup. It's
Well,
not
there's
easy.
almost like too much information, right? You don't know what to trust or who to believe.
Where should you go?
Exactly. It can be overwhelming. And sometimes you just need that helpful guide who can kind of point you in the right direction.
I feel that because I know when I went out there starting my business, I was like, look at all this fun information. Do I do everything or nothing? It's about the same thing.
It's almost the same as when you're starting a podcast and you're trying to figure out how to even get started. And there's all these different things. It's like, get these headphones. No, get this microphone. Use this recording platform. No, that one. And it can lead to a lot of indecision and then a lot of not moving, right? Part of my job is to help unlock that for folks, like really help them, number one, figure out it's actually much better to try something, fail at it, and then move on than it is to just sit and not figure it out.
Failing? That's an option?
Failure is always an option. It's such a good option and people are so afraid of it. And I think, it comes down to sort of, I hate to get all philosophical on you, but kind of how you were raised in reaction to failure and also, what you've experienced in your life, right? And what you view as hardship versus what other people might. And it's so important to build that resilience as a founder because your failures are what are going to add up to your successes.
Ooh, I like how you put that. And it is true. Depending on how you're raised, what you went through is how you're going to look at failure. Because we're raised like you can't fail. You have to succeed. Failing is not an option. But you don't learn unless you fail, from what I'm learning, which is kind of weird.
Yeah, you don't try stuff, right? And when you think about it, as children, we actually love failure, right? Learning how to walk. How many times? I mean, you fall constantly, right? But the people cheer for you when you fall. They're excited when you fail. When you're learning to ride a bike, your parents are constantly helping you get back on when you fall off, right?
True.
And then as we get older, it becomes this shameful thing, right? In some places where you're ashamed to fail, you're ashamed to get a bad grade, or you're ashamed to not get into the top university that you applied to. And so part of this is coming back to that childlike wonder of number one, people being excited and happy for you when you fail, because it means you took a big swing. It means you tried something hard. It means that you went out of your comfort zone. But then also just for yourself, reframing how you feel about it.
That is so true. I like that, out of your comfort zone. Because sometimes you get comfortable being comfortable and don't realize you need to be comfortable being uncomfortable. We got to kind of reverse that a little bit.
If you're constantly winning, it means you're probably not trying the right stuff.
That is so true. I know I've found myself there's so many times where I'm comfortable. Why do I need to do this right now? Unless some act of God or terror comes in. It's like, okay, I need to do something different now. You're right. Okay, let's do something else. And it's crazy how as human beings, we have that innate ability to want to be so comfortable, but not understanding that is dangerous, especially for like having a business.
Well, and I think, if you think back to history, right, there were always these people who were considered the explorers, right? The people who took chances, who took risks, who went out into the unknown. And then there were the people back home who kind of kept things running and maybe had a routine and were consistently, harvesting or hunting and gathering. And so it's not unusual for certain people to be conditioned in certain ways, But I do think founders in general, entrepreneurs, people who are going out on their own, have to be more of that explorer nature. They have to be more okay with the unknown and figuring things out as they go, maybe having a rough map, but then being okay if they don't end up in the exact location in the exact way that they expected.
That's so true. I see that like through my days as well. That sometimes because you have to understand that like the whole world's out in front of us, but we have to take action in order to get where we want to go. And having people like yourselves to actually reach out to and help us get there faster. Because I know when I founded my company, I was stuck sometimes. I still get stuck sometimes. I'm still kind of like, okay, I did all of this, but I got to do more. But how do I do it? I don't have this skill. Where can I find this skill? Who can I reach out to? We can't forget that we can reach out to other people and help build that skill we don't have. But sometimes I find myself in that trap of, well, I've done enough already, but I know I need to do more. It's like a weird little back and forth there.
It is. And sometimes we don't want to necessarily admit weakness. We don't want to reach out for help because then that shows that we don't know. But in reality, many people launch their business because they have this one thing that they really love doing. Their zone of genius. I think there's a bunch of books out about it, right? And then there's all these other parts of running a business that need to happen that might not actually be things that you, A, enjoy doing, or B, are very good at doing. And there's been so much research around leveraging the things you're already really good at and not trying to improve the things you're not great at, right? There's a step function component to just improving things you're already good at. When you focus on your weaknesses, you tend to kind of get dragged down, and then you spend all this time trying to improve them, when in reality, that's not a differentiator for you. And that is something that you should be asking for help on and having someone else, either do it from scratch or, provide you guidance and help on it if it's not your cup of tea. So if you're not organized, paying someone to help you with your operations and getting organized and getting processes and getting SOPs will be worth its weight in gold, because you're not going to be dragged down by focusing on something that you don't like to do.
That is very well said. But what do you mean processes and SOPs? I'm running a company. I don't have time for that.
Exactly.
What?
I was just talking to a founder this morning about that, because people think of process and SOP and they immediately think of rigid, corporate. There won't be innovation. There won't be, excitement anymore. When in reality, processes and SOPs are living, breathing documents, right? Or they can be in systems that are living and breathing. They don't have to be kind of set in stone, chiseled, never to be changed. But what they provide is structure. They provide loose guardrails for how the team is going to operate, especially once your company starts to expand beyond just you. Because if you're really good at doing something, you can probably do it very quickly. When you start to hire a team, if they're not as good as you, number one, they can't read your mind. Number two, they might have, exactly. The amount of founders I work with who feel like their team should be mind readers is
hogwash.
But so you're providing them structure. You're helping them to understand how you'd like to see things executed. And as you start to hand things off to people, they can still be done in the same way that you would do them as the founder, but not by you, which then allows you to do other stuff.
That is so true. I'm starting to learn that, see it myself as I'm going along. I actually kind of saw that too when I actually started creating an SOP and process. I realized all the steps that were there. I'm like, there's no way in the hell anyone's going to follow this. I really need to kind of make this more doable for someone else. I'm like, oh, I get it, but there's like 30 steps here. I looked at that and be like, yeah, I'm not doing this. I'm going to find another way to do it.
Exactly. And I think a lot of times that's actually how we get inefficient. That's how a lot of these, large corporate processes become so much what we used to call red tape, right? Because it doesn't change, it doesn't evolve. No one ever actually sits down and looks at the whole process. They just do their part of the process, and they don't realize that they could cut out 15 steps by just doing one thing slightly differently. And so one of the things that I love is starting to think about what actually has to be done. What are you currently doing to do it? And then let's figure out, is that really the only way it can be done? And sometimes this is the first time that a founder has actually written anything down. Like, the process has lived in their head. They've done it. It's been told, like stories handed down by time, and it's changed, it's evolved as people have come and gone from the company, but it's never truly been written down. You get that one person though who's a Jack or Jill of all trades, and they can handle it. But then you start to hire more people and you give them specialized roles, and that's when things just completely fall apart.
I'm sorry, I've learned that early in my business building. I haven't hired people yet, but I've learned about delegation is key. Like I'm doing everything now, but It doesn't mean that I need to, that I should, or that I have to in the future.
Exactly.
It's a hard thing to let go of.
They say as a founder, your first job should be to constantly replace yourself. So it's constantly thinking about, okay, what should I be paying someone else to do? There's a book called Buy Back Your Time, which is a really, really good book about this, right? Where you start to think about, okay, how much could I pay someone to do this task? And is it worthwhile for my time for me to do it? And I think that's also a helpful conversation, even when you think about your own house and like the things that you do in the daily basis in your house too.
Yes. I always say that we even need systems, even in our own lives, not just our business, because both of these really transfer over, especially for some of us that need even more structure in our lives than others. It really helps us with those, having that system built and create something that we can look back and do over and over again. You know?
And it's not something that we're always taught, right? And so I've been working with my 11-year-old niece on creating a structured calendar for this summer and this school year, because she's going to be in seventh grade. This? Yeah. And she was like, I feel so organized just, creating the calendar. And I think you have to make it exciting for people. And so a lot of the founders I work with, I do a lot of what I like to call founder therapy. It's like, why should you like the structure? Why is the structure good? And where can you still be creative? Where can you still be inventive? How does the structure actually help you be more creative, more innovative, more, how does it push you out of your comfort zone in certain areas because you now have structure in these areas you don't have to think
about? I'd love to dive in more into that creativity and how you work with the founders. Because I know a lot of us, maybe not me, no, maybe me. We were in that place where we're kind of just like our way, the highway, keep it all inside our head. Don't reach out, don't know when. Like I don't know when to start giving things to people, when I should hire people, when I get there. That part is always confusing for me.
Yeah. So, a lot of founders have the same mindset, right? That it's their way or the highway. And part of what I have to get to the bottom of is, why did you start your business in the first place? So what are you trying to accomplish? What are the outcomes? And is that going to be scalable if it's still just all in your head? Are you going to have the impact that you really want to have if you are unable to voice what needs to happen to other people? So that's only where I start, because a lot of people will say, well, no, the whole goal is to scale. The whole goal is to have a team. The whole goal is to have more impact. And that once you root them in that goal, then it becomes, how do we peel that back? And how do we actually get to the point where you can reach that goal? And oftentimes that comes with other people, right? What do they say? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together.
Yes.
Right. And so, it starts to be like, okay, I have to create a team. Well, to create a team, guess what I have to start giving up? Control. Which is not always easy, but there's good ways to start. So one of the ways that I start is figuring out the decisions that you're willing to give up, right? And so there's this concept of a two-way door decision or a one-way door. Two-way door meaning that once the decision is made, you could actually come back from it. So let's say you make it, you realize it's a mistake, you can walk it back. A one-way door decision is a decision where you can't walk it back for whatever reason. You've entered into a long contract, it has reputational risk. And so a lot of founders, when I walk them through that, it's like the number of one-way door decisions are actually quite small. Most decisions are two-way door decisions, meaning that you can empower your team to make choices on their own. Then they can learn, and then you can kind of either walk it back or you can really push forward, right? And help them understand why it was a good or bad decision. That helps your team learn what you like, and then they can start replicating that.
I like how you said that, because I know for myself in building a business, I really want to have a team of other leaders and people I can actually help empower them. Where I don't have to micromanage, I have to be on them, but they can make decisions for themselves because they're humans. They should be able to make decisions for themselves. We're adults, some of us, kind of.
So they say.
Yeah, I'm still crushing my adulthood right now, but that's a different story.
A daily basis. If one more person asks me what's for dinner, I'm going to be like, this adult thing is for the birds.
That's what ChatGPT is for. Chat, what's for dinner? Cannot adult right now. Please help me.
Exactly.
But that's a true story.
It's a very true story.
I think that's what AI was built for, actually, to help us adult more.
But I feel like this is also very relevant and helpful.
Yes. Like you were saying, though, it is very important so they can make their own decisions to help move the company and help feel that they're empowered and feel that their decisions, by making their own decisions, they feel they're a part of the company also. We're not just saying, you're doing this, that's how it is, move along. That's how you get people so disconnected. They stop communicating.
And it's important A founder, no one is ever going to be as dedicated to your company as you because
I've
you're the
learned that.
founder. This was your dream. This was your baby. This was something that you have built. But once you start putting it out into the universe, very much like when you start putting a child out into the universe, other people start to come into play and other people start to have an effect on that child, right? Or your business.
True.
And, what's important is that you are surrounding that business with people who have the skills that you feel are valuable. So if you've hired these people, if you've interviewed them, you've talked to them, you discuss your culture. I love when people actually have culture written down though, because most people believe culture is just a feeling. It's not. It is something tangible. It is something that can be, written down and sort of immersed in a company. But once you've done that, you have to trust these leaders. You hired them for a reason, right? And it's giving away trust, but it's very much in the same way you trust a babysitter or a teacher, right? Someone who you have vetted, who is now coming in to help you shape this company and where it goes. And once you start to bring people in, it is going to evolve, but it's going to evolve in a very cool and interesting way if you allow it. And you don't try to restrict what other people are able to kind of have the imprint on it.
I love that, and I feel that really hard because I feel like a lot of companies, they restrict your creativity nowadays. They want to put you in this box, in this mold, where they think their company should be, but they don't realize that their company is not what they think it's going to be, but it's what everyone else builds it to create it to be.
Yes. And the most important person in this scenario is actually the customer and what they want it to be, right? Because they're the ones who are willing to pay for the service or the product. And so it's really actually what the customer wants the business to be and how they view the business. That's the most important, because we can all start our own business. And if no one wants to buy what we're selling, we're not going to have a business for very long.
That is true. Or you don't know how to sell what you're selling.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel that. Damn, it's so true. I would love to know like a story of what have you found out there in the real world, maybe with a client you've had in the past, maybe some hardships that they had trying to scale their business and some walls that they may have hit as an entrepreneur. Maybe at what got in their path, how you were able to help them get over that.
Yeah, I think a lot of founders that I work with, one of the biggest things for them is ego.
What?
Yeah, I know it's shocking. To be fair, you have to have ego to be able to. There is a certain amount of ego that has to be there. There has to be a level of confidence.
I'll show you.
Exactly. The challenge is sometimes having the self-awareness of when that ego has gotten in the way and when you might need to take a reflective step back. So that's one thing I've seen get in the way a lot. Another thing I'm seeing get in the way a lot lately is funding. And so what I advise is always very efficient operations, right? Starting very small, scaling, as you go, not kind of building the Cadillac before you need the Cadillac. I think sometimes folks get a little too ahead of themselves and they want the whole big company at once without knowing how they're actually going to fund it. And the funding market is not so great these days, right? And so there's a lot of value in bootstrapping. There's a lot of value in, trying to get customers in the door so the revenue can start to pay for things, right? So there's also a lot of value in that because you maintain control of your company. Because one of the things that people often forget is that taking funding also means giving away little pieces.
Yeah.
More so even than having your team make choices. But as you bring in investors, you're gradually giving away little pieces of your control over your company. And sometimes that can actually be worse than, employees or team members, because at least they're working in the business and they truly care about it. But if your investor's not aligned with your long-term vision, if they're not aligned with your mission, your goals of what you're trying to accomplish, it can be actually detrimental to take their capital.
That seems very self-destructing right there. Going down into a dark place eventually.
That runway matters, but keeping an eye on the runway and making sure that you're working within your means is always the best.
Yeah, I feel that. People don't tell you when you're starting a business, all these things you have to do, what skills you have to have, or like the people you have to hire, or even what kind of people to hire. Like I've heard that you should hire not for someone to do the job you know how to do, but hire someone that can help you get to where you want to get to in the company. I really didn't quite understand that very well. I'm learning how that makes sense more.
Yeah, I think there's two sides to that, right? There's one side of that, which is if you're not good at something, hiring someone to do it, right? Okay. Which is you are hiring them for a skill, and that's just what they're going to do. So for instance, I cannot stand accounting and bookkeeping. I don't know about you, but
Yeah.
that was something that I pushed off to someone else immediately. My CPA does add other value, right? Because she will ask me strategic questions. She helps me with specific investments. She helps me to do other things. My bookkeeper does not add other value. She literally just does a task that I do not under any circumstances want to do. And that gives me time back. And that's okay. That's her role. She likes it. It's something she enjoys doing. It makes no sense to me. That's fine. I think we sometimes put a little too much on what we're going to outsource, right? Now, if you start to think about someone who's in more of what I would call like a leadership role, or someone who you're bringing in that's going to be client facing and client interacting, it is more important that they understand that 5-year vision, that they get that long term, right? They're not coming in just to do a right now sort of task. I think in the age of AI, this is even more important, right? Because could bookkeeping eventually be done by AI? To be fair, my bookkeeping software does try to allocate things, and then she has to go back and fix them because it doesn't always get them right. But the AI is not going to be, doing strategic client calls and I think that's kind of where you start to think about it, is like, what are things I can automate potentially with an AI agent, because it is always the same. And what are the things where I really want someone to come in who's going to ask me the hard questions, who's going to help me think through things. To be fair, I have trained a custom Gemini to be my chief of staff, and I gave it a background, I gave it an MBA, and I asked it to start asking me questions, pushing on me, right? They're not bad. And I think if you understand what you're using it for, and you understand that obviously you're taking everything it says to you and you're rejiggering it, right? Or you're rethinking it and using your lens as a human to, humanize it, I think it makes a lot of sense.
I agree with that, because I've done that, trying to find a strategic business partner with AI. And I read through what it gave me, and I understand it, but understanding it and being able to implement it are two different things. I don't necessarily have that skill to do. Right. But I'm like, oh, AI can do all of it, but can it really? No.
Yeah, I don't think it's going to be executing anytime soon, which means that my job is good. Because my job is to, take that plan, the strategic vision, the excitement, and actually help you to execute it, right? To deliver it. That's what I love, is the taking all the puzzle pieces and putting them all together and having it become what it's supposed to be.
And I know that can be very hard and difficult. I myself is trying to figure out, when do I need to hire an operationals team? When do I need to hire another person? How often can I look to AI to help with a lot of this? And it's just like, it gives me information, but it doesn't have, like you said, that strategic implementation part of it.
Yeah, and
hard.
It's difficult sometimes to know, because I think as business owners, we think to ourselves, okay, I have to have a certain amount of revenue before I can hire somebody. But then in some cases, you need that person before you can actually get to that amount of revenue, because you need your time unlocked, and and this is where that fear of failure and risk comes in, right? And so trying to get people part-time, right, on a 1099, or using things like Upwork or other sites where you can get folks that are not 100% committed, right, where you're not responsible for all of their income and you're just doing it on a project basis and feeling it out is so beneficial. I think for me, when I launched the business, the biggest thing was networks, right? It's just meeting people, figuring out, being able to ask questions and not feel like someone's going to say, well, that's a dumb question. Environments where there's other founders who, sometimes they're in the exact same boat as you. Sometimes they're a year or two down the road from you. And then once you've had your business for a significant amount of time, you become that middle person who can both be mentored and mentor someone who's coming behind you. And I think there's value in that as well, is helping the people who maybe aren't as far along as you, because you start to have a new appreciation for where you were and how far you've come. Because when we get to a new place, we don't always appreciate the journey that got us there.
We're a little frustrated sometimes.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of times, honestly, like, we're like, why am I not, 10 years down the road?
Exactly. I know, that's why I have no hair. I have the frustration.
That's exactly what happened. All the frustration.
Mind-boggling. I enjoy actually teaching other people what I can, how far I've come. I enjoy that, because you learn from teaching also. You can't realize little things and nuggets. You're like, oh, wait, I get that now. It's by teaching and showing somebody else. You may not have gotten it before.
Exactly. Also, so things evolve. Things evolve over time, right? And so the way you did it when you first launched years ago might have evolved just a little bit. And then you also gain more knowledge by explaining it to someone else, because you realize, oh, wait a minute, there's a new system or a new way of doing things, or a new perspective.
Yes, I agree with that. And sometimes I find myself getting caught up in the shiny object syndrome of, oh, a new way, there's another way, maybe it's better. Maybe I should try it that way. And I have to just like, okay, breathe. I have to kind of have a step-by-step process to myself. Why do I need this new thing? Is what I have not working. I have to kind of ask myself these questions and figure out, okay, no more shiny objects, young man.
The hard part too, though, is when you're a solopreneur and things aren't working and you have to admit that they're not working because
Yes.
of you, not because of the system or
Moment of
anything else.
silence for entrepreneurs in the friend zone.
When you realize that CRM can only work if you actually put data in it, or the project management tool will only work if you fill it out. That's
Yeah,
the worst.
that's
And there's
true.
no
I feel that.
one to blame but yourself.
I feel that. So let me ask you this. Let's say I'm a new business owner, or maybe I've been in the game for a while and I have a business. I'm trying to figure out how I want to grow, how I want to scale, but it's just me. I don't know when to hire. I'm not sure what I need to hire for. I'm just kind of stuck in this like resistance against myself. What
Yeah.
are maybe some steps that you could give me or people like me to kind of help them get to where they would like to be in their business by working not in it, but on it?
Yeah. So the first thing I like to do is really understand all of the different technology that they're utilizing. So I have people actually list everything out for me. I have a little spreadsheet for them to fill out. It's like, what systems are you using? What do they do? How often do you actually use them? What do they talk to, if anything? Right. And so that first exercise sometimes will be enough to open up eyes of like, wait a minute, why do I have all of this tech that I'm not using? Or I could be, using this to do this. Why do I have two different things? The next thing is really that the goals, the passion, right? What is the actual outcome? Sometimes what you originally set out as the outcome years ago when you started your business is not still the outcome. And that's okay. It really is fine for that to be the case. But what you have to know yourself is what it is that you're going after.
Right there.
Right. And if it is to grow and scale, the way that you carry yourself, the way that you make decisions is going to have to be slightly different. Right? What does growing and scaling look like? Does it look like 3 times the client load? Does it look like 10 times the client load? What does it look like, right? What could it be? And then we walk backwards from there. So if it is 3 times the client load, what are the things that you need? Like you probably need an automated onboarding process. You probably need, someone who can help you with client relations or customer support, depending on the type of service you're providing. And so it's essentially figuring out what is that long term and then working backwards from there systematically. And then what we do is we actually figure out, okay, great. Here's where I am. Here's where I want to go. Here's a roadmap, steps, things I need to do to get there. And then where I come in sometimes, it depends, is that accountability coach or hands-on keys helping you execute that, right? Because sometimes the reason you haven't executed it is because you don't know how. And as we discussed before, you might not want to have admitted it before. But once you see it on paper, it's much easier to say, hey, of these 10 things, I can do 6 of them, but I need you to do those 4. And it's easier for your brain to say, well, I'm still doing stuff, but I need someone who can do these things. And until you see it all in one place, it's very hard to think about giving off pieces of the work to be done. But once you can see how it's all going to connect together and where you're still actively participating, it becomes much easier to say, hey, actually, I don't want to do these things. That's fine.
I feel that. So you're saying I need to draw a roadmap and list every little piece of technology that I may or may not be using.
Yeah, I think the first thing you need to do is like, where do you want to be in 2 years? How many clients do you want to have? What is your goal revenue, right? Once you figure those things out, you can also check yourself. Because does your goal revenue align with your goal number of clients?
Ooh,
because sometimes there's
alignment.
Sometimes there's this alignment there and we have to spend a little bit of time digging in. Okay, well, if this is your goal revenue, but this is your goal number of clients, is that going to match up?
But
how do you
I don't know. I don't know what I don't know.
Yeah.
I was a technician. I know how to do this, but I didn't think building a business was going to be all this. Just kind of get stuck in that. Well, I can do one thing, but I don't know how to do the other thing. Or I don't trust myself to do the other thing.
So sometimes it's just getting it down on paper and then having someone else check it and kind of help rationalize it or help push and say, no, each client should have a minimum spend of 10,000, which means if you want 30 clients, your revenue should be, starting to think through and push on the numbers a little bit. And having someone by your side while you're doing that helps keep the puck moving. Because part of the problem is that when you're doing that by yourself, and even when you're doing it with AI is not going to push you once it feels like you've gone down a rabbit hole. It's just going to keep spitting answers back at you, right? But a real person is going to say, I can see we've pulled at a string here, but let's move on, right? Maybe we've gotten to where we need to go here, and now we need to move on to the next thing because we've gone down into something that maybe either A, hit a nerve, or B, you feel very comfortable in, so you want to stay in the thing you're comfortable in and not move on to the topics that you're not comfortable in. And see, the problem with using AI as a thought partner is like, it doesn't have that human ability to kind of look at you, hear how you're talking and say, wait a minute, no, we need to move on to the next
maybe
topic.
it should.
I'm sure it's coming. I'm sure it's coming.
I asked too soon, and then before you know it, my AI is going to be talking back to me, yelling at me, putting me in check.
I always say please and thank you, because when the AI takes over the world, I want it to remember me as a nice person.
You remember me? I never yelled at you once. I'm sorry, Alexa.
I was always appreciative.
They'll be like, you'll be left alone.
Exactly. You just leave me alone in my little pasture wherever I have to go.
Speaking of AI, I feel like a lot of us kind of get stuck in that AI loop a lot, trying to use it for us to help us with our business. But in a way, it almost like holds us back. Because like you said, having that human accountability partner, being able to have someone push you forward. But like we're just so stuck in, I can use AI for this. I can use AI for that. And you're all stuck in this AI vortex of misconception and denial and whatnot, that you just kind of don't do what you need to move the business along a lot of the times.
Yeah, a lot of where I've seen my clients be really successful in using AI is taking large data sets or large things that they would take days, weeks to analyze, and having the AI help them come up with like, what are the things I should focus on? Another place is creating custom GPTs or, custom Gemini where you're having it evaluate things. So I have one client who is applying for grants, and we created a custom GPT in their system that allows them to enter the grant, and it will tell them the alignment. It'll give them an alignment score. And that's obviously based off of what we've trained the model on, right? We trained the model on, this is the different sections that we would want you to score. Here's our, 5-year plan. Here are the things that we're working on. These are areas where we would want a grant. And then what it does is it helps all the team, right? Because originally what was happening is they knew we wanted grants. So they would just send random grants, right? Any grant they could find. They'd be like, oh, here's a grant. Now we can put it in this GPT, and the GPT will say, yes, that's actually worth going after. Here's the alignment score. Here's how it fits. Or it'll say, hey, this is actually not at all aligned with your mission. Don't waste time on it. Whereas before, someone would waste time reading through it, trying to figure out, like, could we somehow apply for it? And I think there's ways that you can use AI to move the ball forward, but you have to really be actively engaging with it in a way where you know exactly what the problem is you're trying to solve, and then you're finding the places where AI can be helpful.
Love that. That's very powerful. I've actually heard that quite a few times recently from some other people I've had on here about programming your own GPT and just spending that time. It takes a lot of time to go back and forth, ask it the right questions, to get the right information back, and just kind of get through some of the hallucinations that might happen. And I've noticed sometimes too that it doesn't, when you create this custom GPT, sometimes it doesn't always remember all this stuff you put into it, but putting so much information. That's the issue I've ran into. It can be really frustrating.
Too, and this is where the documentation becomes so important, because, if things are just in your head and they're not actually documented, you can't really use them to train the GPT, right? You've got to have documentation. You've got to have a process that you can, basically decide, okay, this point in the process is where we're going to engage the AI. This is exactly what we're going to use it for. This is why we're using it. And also, this is how we're going to evaluate that it's doing the right thing. So for the first few, you're definitely going to double check it. And then maybe every month or so, you're going to recheck it, and you're going to try and retrain it a little bit. And you're going to give it feedback. So if it tells you the wrong answer, you're going to then give it the feedback so it knows that it gave you the wrong answer. It's sort of like training an intern.
I love how you said that. Yeah. So if we start with the SOPs, then we can train the AI properly. That really makes a lot of sense. So you're saying that we got to sit here and come up with all the SOPs or all the things in my head, and that does not sound fun.
So it's not all at once. I like to start on the thing that feels most chaotic or the most broken.
Everything.
It cannot be everything, Justin. There's definitely like one or two things where you would think to yourself, if this was fixed, right? And that's where you start. is where is that big pain point? Where's the pressure point? Where do you feel like things are boiling over? Or where are your customers complaining, right? Where is it impacting their experience? And that's where you start. And then I think once you're able to start there, you start to see that it's not as hard as you think, right? It becomes easier. Also, sometimes once you start fixing things, it can do one of two things. It can highlight other areas that are bigger pain points, or it can actually help resolve some of the smaller things that were issues, but maybe not burning fires. Because as you start to document things, as you start to smooth out processes, it might actually create less friction down the line, which then helps so there's less to document because there becomes things are rolled into one. Because a lot of times we don't realize how interconnected things that we do in our business truly are.
That is so true. I know when I started documenting my process of the podcast and editing and posting, I realized some of this stuff is kind of redundant. I'm just kind of wasting time over here. I was able to remove like 4 or 5 steps that kind of combines.
Exactly.
Like I saw it out in front of me. It was laid out. And I just kind of worked it step by step, exactly what I put on there to make sure it works how it says too. And I was able to remove stuff, redo it. And I saw that, and it is very true. It did make it a lot easier.
See? So now you have proof.
Yeah, because business, sometimes it's like we forget that we just kind of have to start. We have to do something first. And as we start, it becomes a lot easier. We forget that sometimes. We got to get stuck in our head. I can do all of this, but like having someone to reach out to and talk it through, it really helps the engagement understand. It clarifies stuff for us.
Exactly. And sometimes, as founders, we often want to boil the ocean, right? And so sometimes all it takes is one person saying, you cannot boil the ocean. You need to start right here, because we want to start at all the things.
Being on this journey, I've been learning that because like you want to do everything and you do everything, you do nothing, but you just have this such passion and drive. You got to get this done. We got to do this. Let's do this that way. And then before you know it, you've done nothing and haven't got any customers. You haven't moved your needle. You haven't built your business. You just created another job for yourself.
Exactly, which is a trap that a lot of people fall into, which is like, I left my 9 to 5 and now I'm working 24 hours a day because I haven't actually built a business. I built me as an hourly worker for other companies.
100%. I saw that for myself for the longest time. And so I started creating systems and processes down so this system allows me to work on other things because this system is in place. So this can get done strategically and I can move on and do other things.
That also helps you to decide where to hire and where to put people or where to get help. Maybe not even hiring. One of my favorite things that I've done is actually hire my mom as a free intern to help me with tasks that involve like pitching, but cold pitching. She loves it, and I think it actually has helped her understand what I do, which has been really helpful. But she pitches like a lot of my media placements. She pitches a lot of my podcast stuff, and so like she retired, she was bored, and she wanted to feel connected. She wanted to feel involved. And now I've taught her how to do Loom videos. I've taught her how to do YouTube, and she's out there doing it. Right. And so sometimes there might be help out there in unconventional places. They might have some good skills. You never know. There could be some high school kid who really wants to figure out how to do something. Right. And I think one of the things that we owe this next generation, because we're getting so invested in AI, one of the things we owe this next generation is helping them figure out what their place is, because AI is actually taking on a lot of the things that we used to have interns or, high school students do, right? And so we owe it to them to teach them how to interact with AI and how to use it to help businesses, how to use it to get a job, how to use it to fulfill duties. Because let's face it, the education system is a bit behind and is probably not teaching them that. A lot of the entry-level roles, even for coding now, right? There's, Microsoft Copilot, there's Code Assist, there's a lot of roles where, we owe it to the next generation to teach them, how do you properly prompt AI? Where should you use it? Where shouldn't you use it? As you said, ethically, what are the boundaries? Like, how are you training them? Which AI are you using? Because I feel like there's a new one popping up every week. Right. And they're getting all the funding. So, you never know. But it is something that I've been thinking a lot about. I've been talking with others a lot about is how do we help the next generation figure out what their place is? And if AI truly is taking a lot of these menial tasks that used to be something that a junior associate would do, how do we help them figure out where their place is, what their role is, what they're able to do? AI is a positive, right? And I think using AI to get back to human creativity and, human excitement, right? So using AI to take the things that drag you down, that are not creative, that are not exciting, that don't bring you joy. And then that way, when you hire someone, they're actually able to do things that do bring them joy and that make them excited, because then they're going to be excited to talk to your customers. They're going to be excited about the value proposition of your business, and they're going to be more dedicated. I think we've all been stuck. We've all been there. I think the most important thing to realize and remember is that a moment in time is literally just that, a moment in time, right? And so if just because you feel stuck now doesn't mean that you can't do something an hour from now, that will be one small step forward. It doesn't have to be the whole thing. It can just be very small micro steps. We get so caught up in the macro that we forget that it's every little tiny step, right? The marathon is not run on marathon day. It's done through all the training that you've done to get to marathon day, right? And so each day is a step in that right direction. So that's number one. Number two, I am very active on LinkedIn, and I greatly appreciate engagement on LinkedIn posts, just because the LinkedIn algorithm is so confusing and I can never figure out from 1 minute to the next what it likes. And then I have a podcast called Managed Chaos, which it's really me and my co-hosts in 15-minute increments. We have guests who come on, and we aim to give you something actionable in 15-minute bites that will help you either grow as a person or grow your business. Yes, there's a lot of, we have fun like this. We laugh and we talk about it, but it's, I think it's always important. And Justin, I appreciate that you always do this on your episodes, is like, give actionable things that people can do. To me, a human being is someone who cares about the community and the people around them, and who wants to give back in some way. And so is tied to the community, is tied to the success of those around them, and who enjoys lifting others up. I think that's what differentiates us from AI.
Well, thank you so much, Katrina, for coming on today, and I appreciate your patience and everything. Have a wonderful rest of your day. Bye.
Bye.